I want to preface this video by saying I'm not a gamer. I appreciate good stories, but when it comes to the arena of video games, I'm undoubtedly not what you would consider to be and I say this with the deepest possible respect, a video game nerd. I don't really delve into the lore of games. In fact, I don't really play video games a whole lot anymore. And when I did, it was mostly your standard first-person shooter games, mixed in with a couple of, role-playing games and so on and so forth. However, I can appreciate a really, really good story. So in this video, and for people who are very much into the video games, again, like I mentioned, I'm not a gamer, so forgive me if I'm not doing the art form justice. I'd like to talk about how video games are a comprehensive art form. This idea was actually spurred on by a very good friend of mine who absolutely adores video games, and him and I have played a couple of really, really insightful ones, or he's rather suggested to me a couple of ones that are quite insightful, and he sort of opened my eyes to the storytelling potential of video games as well. As I mentioned, I love a good story. It's the reason why I love to read. It's the reason why I love myths. It's the reason why I like poetry. Anything that has a strong narrative element is, to me, I'm absolutely addicted to. So video games with a good story, for me, I absolutely adore. But in this video, I'm going to underline 3 reasons as to why video games are a comprehensive art form. The first one being is that they combine a lot of different creative elements. There's acting, especially with voice acting, which is a lot more difficult than I think some people realize. There's original music that has to be written for the video game project itself. The writing, not just the script writing. There has to be coding involved with it, the world building, the programs that they use, and the worlds that they build requires a lot of writing. There's set design, costume design, special effects as well, what with the coding, gameplay mechanics as well, motion capture, cinematography. All of these are coalesced into one. It's almost as like you're taking the best of books, of movies, and of music, and you're combining it all into one art form. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's comprehensive, to say the least. Probably the most low-hanging fruit, but we'll move forward. The second reason is that it comes the closest, in my opinion, to fully immerse the player into the story. Unlike books and films, where you almost have to want to immerse yourself into it, this really only applies more so for narrative games such as, Fallout or Dishonored, Skyrim, etc. I know they're all Bethesda games, go figure. I told you I'm not a gamer, but there are also other ones such as Control, Alan Wake, even the Resident Evil ones to a specific extent. Silent Hill is an old school one, which is, again, arguably one of the greatest video games ever made with its gameplay mechanics. But then you also have video games like Super Smash Bros. Melee, which are also very, very immersive, despite them on the surface being a casual kids party game, a fighting game. But there is so much depth to it as well. Just going back beyond the writing of it, and the mechanics of it, and the music and the stage design and everything, there is a remarkable amount of immersion in there, especially when you get into the nitty-gritty of physics exploits within the game, how the players throughout 20 years, this game came out in 2001, but how this game was able, even though it was rushed throughout its development, has so many exploits that players can use called techs that make the game an unbelievable masterpiece. And as someone who doesn't necessarily game, I can put my hand on my heart and say it is one of my favorite games ever. And it's for that reason alone the GameCube goes down as one of the greatest consoles ever, just purely because they have Super Smash Bros. Melee on there. But back to the more narrative games as well, you do get the sense now that they because the writing is so good, and not to mention as well, with these narrative games where you're controlling your character going through, there's divergent speech trees that can lead to different options. You don't really get that in a film or in a book. Yes, I know there are those Adventure Time books where I'm sure you've seen them. You open the page, you read a little bit, you make a decision, and it says flip to page 31, and so on and so forth. So there have been attempts in the literary sense. There also has been a couple of attempts in film. I know Netflix came out with one called Bandersnatch. I haven't necessarily experienced it myself, but I think there's something like over 5 billion different ways to watch the movie. Don't quote me on that. But, revolutionary for its time. However, both of them don't have that same immersion, they don't give the player the same level of control as a video game does. And then, of course, lastly, I think because of this immersion factor and this unbelievable syncretic happening of all of these different creative elements, there's more creative scope to tell and flesh out a story, which is ultimately the biggest strength of the video game. Even if it's something as simple as, I don't want to say Tetris, because that really doesn't have a point aside from, don't make sure that your spatial awareness is good enough to not lose the game. But especially with these narrative elements, like Dishonored, like the Elder Scrolls series, I would say even in Half-Life 2 mods like Dear Esther, where there is no essential gameplay aside from you walking around and admiring the beautiful computer-generated scenery and learning this and listening to the story as it's being told. It's remarkably immersive, and it's such a creative way of doing it, and I wish more video games would sort of take that approach. I know there's one called Firewatch, which my good friend put me on as well, and where essentially you play as this fire ranger and you're going around and you end up learning a little bit more about him and how he's how he's taking a break from his wife and so on and so forth. So you're really able to feel that emotion conveyed through the video game. And I think because there is the element within the video game where the player is controlling the character, there is a lot more scope to tell a story. And the player ultimately ends up being an active participant in it and ends up writing their own story, which will always be a unique telling of it, because no two players will play the game exactly the same. So, like I said, I'm not a big fan of them anymore, but those are the 3 reasons why I think they're a comprehensive art form. I can appreciate the ones that have made a solid impact and that tell a really, really good story. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll put the question to you. Do you guys play video games? If so, which ones do you play? Which ones are really have a really good narrative arc that I can sink my teeth into? Of course, like I said, I don't play them often anymore, and I'm about to sell my console as well. Or, that's another question, should I upgrade to PC? Anyway, if you have any suggestions for video games that I should play, drop them in the comments below. I'm going to put in the description a couple of the narrative games that I really enjoy. And as always, thank you so much for watching.